transit, feasibility plan, service development, innovative on-demand transit projects, just to name a few. Before joining HART, Christopher worked as a senior planner at Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority, that's a sister county here, where he launched the national's first P3 transit partnership with TNC that subsidized riders to bus stops using public dollars. And also, he worked for CUTR for a while, and this is his homecoming speech. So today's talk is about making tomorrow's technology work for transit today. And let's welcome Chris.
Thank you all very much. This is very exciting to be here. I used to sit where you all sat, so this is very exciting to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to come back and present. This is very exciting. As stated, I am the manager of planning at HART here. I've been there since the beginning of September of last year. Relatively new in Hillsborough. Prior to that, I worked for Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority for 4.5 years. And really had an opportunity to focus on working on some really exciting, innovative projects in addressing what a lot of transit agencies are facing today, in finding sort of the status quo is no longer acceptable anymore in transit as we know it today. And we are finding ourselves more and more battling competition with other companies and trying to find ways where we aren't competing but more becoming partners with them to address their ability to grow and hopefully create partnerships that will preserve our systems as much as possible. So today I'm going to give you a little overview of HART. I'm going to talk to you about some of the changing philosophies that even locally we are experiencing here as an agency and agencies nationwide. And then I'm going to talk to you about two pilot projects that are very innovative and are really leading the way in the way that transit is moving, and partnering with TNCs and solving first mile, last mile solutions and addressing the demands of really what has become a new customer base for transit agencies. So should take about 35-40 minutes, and I'll have some time for questions for you. So just a brief overview of HART. Obviously, we serve here in Hillsborough County. USF is one of our core areas that we serve, and having one of the most dense populations and highest populated areas in this in the USF district. We provide services to about 1.3 million people, and that number continues to grow every year. We service about 1,100 square miles. And one of the big challenges of Hillsborough County and being able to serve transit well is that we are really a relatively sparse urban geography. We do have some dense areas in downtown Tampa, and in this area here, relatively dense compared to what you see elsewhere throughout the county, but there is a lot of rural space, and being able to provide productive transit service is very challenging in a geography like this, because productivity is all about how many people you are picking up and dropping off and moving per mile. And when you're very spread out and you're spread out thin a population, it's difficult to keep your buses full, and sometimes it's difficult to move a lot of people continuously across the landscape. So we'll talk about a little bit about how that is part of the genesis for some of these projects that we're doing today. We have about 200 buses that serve local express routes and sort of a quasi-BRT, we call it BRT Light, the Metro Rapid, which serves the Fletcher Avenue across the campus there. And that's been very successful. We also have a flexible service vans, which essentially will deviate off of a fixed route and pick people up and bring them to the transit route. And that was sort of one of the first steps. That was sort of one of the first steps to the to some of our TNC projects that we've seen before. Oh, I was going to say, can we close the door? We have 34 routes right now. We used to have 42 routes. We just made some cuts here that I'll talk a little bit about. Downtown, if you all have not had the opportunity to see our streetcar, it runs between the Channelside District down to like Amalie Arena and Ybor. And if you all have the chance to go ride that, I would definitely encourage you to. It's a lot of fun. It'll take you between the Riverwalk downtown and Ybor. Saturdays, you can go out there and ride it for free. So encourage you to maybe take a bike ride on the Riverwalk. You can lock your bike up and or take a city bike ride on the bike share, and then hop on a streetcar and ride around. It's really a lot of fun. It's a great way if you have friends in town to get them around. And on top of that, we have 9 transit centers. The nearest one to here is the University Area Transit Center, which has 11 routes serving it, I believe. The Bull Runner goes there as well. That would be your nearest connection. And as a side note to here, you as USF students ride our system for free. We have a contract with the university whereby all you have to do, is show your university ID, and you can hop on the public transit for free. That is a program that we're very proud of. It's been very successful, and we will continue to provide that into the future. So let me get a little bit into some of the background on what transit agencies are facing today to sort of give you a little bit of perspective on why these technologies are becoming more valuable and more sought after by other public transit agencies. And at the heart of it is funding challenges. For HART, much like transit agencies across the country, we are facing declining revenue sources. And at the same time, we are experiencing increasing operational costs. And particular to transit agencies across the nation get their primary funding sources from all kinds of different places. Some are sales taxes, some get gas taxes, some get some combination of that. Here in Hillsborough County and Pinellas County, we get our primary tax funding from what's called ad valorem. And if you own a house in Hillsborough County, you get a little line item on there when you pay your property tax. A portion of that goes to HART. Which isn't really a big piece, but you aggregate that across the county and we get tens of millions of dollars, and that is our primary operating source. Prior to current day, where we're experiencing some significant upticks in the value of homes in the county, and we're expected to see about a 7.5% increase in our funding due to the increased home values, we saw huge declines in the values of homes that started in the mid-2000s. And at that point in time, Hillsborough and Pinellas had significant I'm sorry, excuse me, the word is escaping me, reserves built up to the point where we were able to withstand the crash in ad valorem taxes that were coming into transit agencies for a long period of time. Recently, HART really has come to the point where we run out of our reserves. And at the same time, we're still experiencing some relatively depressed value in home values. So with that, we're forced with about a $6 million budget shortfall that really came to our doorstep in the next fiscal year. And we were forced to make some really difficult choices. And part of that was to make 20% cut in service worth about $5.8 million. And when you're making service cuts, as a transit agency, our job is to be out there providing the best service to the most amount of people with the money that we have. So cutting 20% of the service across the county is very difficult. You're going to impact some people. But what we did is come up with a very detailed strategy, and at the bottom of the page here is called Mission Max. Mission Max was a strategy that was developed out of our comprehensive operations plan, which was really aimed at looking at what our budget shortfall was and how are we going to deal with continuing to put out the best service that we could with the short budget that we had. And with that, really what came out of it is that we found that we needed to focus our investments on the urban core and make and on the urban core, because that's where the bulk of our ridership was. And the goal of the operations plan was to put out service that at least maintained or bettered the service for about 80% of our current ridership, and it would likely negatively impact about 20%. But if you think about it, that's a pretty good ratio considering the challenges that we are faced with. On top of that, the board mandated that we really go out and we begin to look at innovative service solutions. And innovative service solutions could be anything from neighborhood circulators. How could we introduce different types of modes, different types of vehicles in our fleet? Was it always necessary to put out a 40-foot diesel bus on a roadway? If you could serve a neighborhood with something smaller and a little cheaper. So with this Mission Max and this funding challenges, we really began to see a change in the way we were operating and a planning philosophy. And what we have now at HART, and a lot of agencies are beginning to do, is change our philosophy in the way in which they are doing their business. And it's in short, what we can say is no longer can bus companies simply stand around and be the status quo bus company that they used to be before. You can't just be a bus company anymore. You have to be mobility managers, and you have to look out there and understand that there are now new technologies and new ways about moving people. There's new demand. There's a new demand for different types of modes that can move people around. And a lot of that plays into this new generation of millennials that are coming up, and they are the future of what public transit will rely on and being moved around, and they are a new type of customer. They rely on their phones. You're seeing significant decreases in driver's license registrations, and they want to move around in transit, and they want to move to cities where they don't have to buy a vehicle, that they can sit on a bus and do their work. They can have Wi-Fi on a vehicle and just be able to ride to their workplace and be more productive instead of sitting in a single occupancy vehicle. And out of this, what has really come out of this demand is this new, a lot of new technologies have become at our disposal. And primarily when it comes to, there are a whole slew of them, but what we'll focus on today is really that on-demand model and the automated vehicle model. And we're only going to touch briefly on the automated vehicle model, just sort of give you an introduction to what HART is doing. That in itself is probably an entire 50-minute presentation. So in doing all of this, we are looking at how we develop partnerships to address this direct competition in the marketplace. And we see the rise of Uber, and we see the rise of Lyft. And just to put it into perspective, we need to understand that what really sunk in for transit agencies is for Uber, it took 5 years for them to get their 1 billionth ride. So in 5 years, it took them to get 1 billion rides. To get to 2 billion, it only took them 6 more months. That's how fast it grew. So it was an exponential growth, and we began to see a competition that may or may not necessarily be proven with empirical evidence, but it's very hard to argue against the fact that we as transit agencies are seeing competition from ride sourcing companies that people would much rather get it, hail it on their iPhone, be able to see it coming, and not have to sometimes worry about the unreliability of public transit, whether or not it's going to show up at their bus stop in time. So with that, we began to develop the philosophy that here we are with a direct competitor that is having a negative impact on us. And the less riders we have, that means the less money we're getting next year from the federal government. Our grants are based on the amount of people that we move and the amount of miles that we move those people. And if we are seeing a significant decline in ridership, that can have a significant impact on the way that we are getting funded and the grants that are available. So for us, it behooves us to start to look at how do we partner with these companies and assisting us to get people to ride more transit instead of just trying to outcompete them, because you're just not going to be able to do it. This is a great graphic here that sort of gives you this vision of mobility service as a system. There's all these components to this in which in which public transit needs to be more aware of getting people from bike ped, park and rides, ride share, van pool, taxi, car share. How do we capture those markets and get them to, and get a share of that market and get those people to participate in public transit? And we believe that we've developed a pretty good model, one of the first in the nations, that is one of the very first steps in beginning to address that solution. So how do we go about developing this competitive model? So first of all, we need to understand how TNCs really came to be, and that helps us understand our approach to building our own model. And it should be noted that Uber didn't invent their model. In the mid-60s, the MIT Mobility Labs was one of the first ones to develop a computer program where you could put in an address and it would have an algorithm to where it could send a vehicle to that address the way that Uber does. What didn't exist was the ability for somebody to do it with a phone or a computer and for it to communicate to a car and get it there. And what has emerged since that time is mobile technology, GPS. And we find this convergence of all the right technologies at just the right time to where Uber was able to leverage all these technologies to where you have a mobile device and you taking advantage of mobile capabilities, GPS, and this idea that you can stick an address in and it's going to go to some car somewhere and someone's actually going to show up at your doorstep. And all these technologies converged into one place and they made it happen. So they didn't necessarily invent that concept, but they were the first ones to put it into practice, and they've done it very, very well. And other companies have copied that model. So what we as transit agencies need to understand in developing a model is that we need to understand we are in that space too. We are part of this time where there are new technologies available that we need to begin to leverage, that we need to begin to understand. We have real-time systems on our vehicles that allow us to tell you when our bus is coming. We have GPS on our vehicles to be able to know where everything is. We have asset management systems and all this different technology that we need to understand that how do we leverage all of these different technologies together in order to be able to run a better system. One of the big decisions in being able to develop a competitive model is understanding, do we partner with an existing company or are we going to build our own? And building our own is a lot different from just going out and creating a partnership with Uber and saying you're going to do rides for us. And there's two different ways of thinking about this. If you are to partner with Uber, they've already invested all the capital and infrastructure and putting their software out there. They have drivers on the street. And if you're going to develop your own, you need to develop an app. You need to develop contracts with people to provide that service. And then you need to perhaps market it more than Uber might already be marketing to people. Is there anybody in here who hasn't heard of Uber or hasn't taken an Uber ride? Has everyone here taken an Uber ride? Okay, so this is very easy to understand then. One of the primary guiding decisions in this process for HART, however, that got separated from us deciding whether or not we were going to partner with Uber or partner or create our own app is this regulatory, some regulatory process or policies that were in place both internally and in the county. And this goes both for PSTA and HART, who really are the two agencies in the country right now that have really led the way in doing these types of projects. And the fact that Hillsborough County had the PTC, which is the Public Transportation Commission, in which they essentially made it illegal for Uber and Lyft to operate until, I believe, the middle of last year. I want to say the end of July. And as such, Uber and Lyft continued to operate. And if you were a private company, you certainly could partner with Uber and Lyft, and you weren't necessarily, you were able to get around some of these regulatory issues. But as a public transit agency, we could not get around skirting any regulation or trying to find any loopholes in those regulations, and we just simply were not able to partner with Uber and Lyft at that time. So that really gave us one avenue to go, and that was to build our own app if we were going to be doing it at the time in which HART was going to. In Pinellas County did not have a PTC, and they did not have a regulatory commission that deemed Uber and Lyft illegal. So they were able to partner with Uber and Lyft for their program, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The third decision here and who you're going to partner with is really what is the problem that you're focusing on. Are you looking for first mile, last mile solutions, which is the age-old question in transit? How do you get to your first bus stop? How do you get to the first leg of your ride? And when the bus gets you to where you're going, how do you get from that last stop to where it is that you need to go? And is it walking, biking, and now you have an affordable option with Uber and Lyft, or some other means? These are some of the companies that have popped up around the country in recent times that are able to provide these types of services. So that certainly went into the decision-making process. And if you are looking to simply provide first mile, last mile solutions, it's a little easier to be able to do it with, you're not as limited in having to create your own technology, and that'll make more sense as I progress through this. So let me give you some examples. These are just only a few of the examples. The very first project that was the first subsidized project partnership with a TNC in the country, in which tax dollars are being used to subsidize rides to bus stops, was Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority. And I was very, very lucky to have been the project manager on that, and it was a super exciting project that really helped put this whole technology and idea on the map, and really helped to get HART going and some of these other companies. And a lot of lessons were learned out of this, and we'll talk more about the lessons learned out of this, but it was a very exciting time that somebody was finally able to put it on the street and be able to have an agency that was willing to take that risk. Because at that point in time, a lot of agencies are still not necessarily ready to do it because there is risk involved in doing this. It's never been done before. There's a lot of federal regulations that are more or less have some loopholes in them that allow you to perform these types of services. So with that in mind, HART created their own first mile, last mile solution with their own app. And what HART did was sort of take some of the lessons learned from Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority and created their own. If you go to Google Play, you can download HyperLink, and you can find a vehicle here in the university area. There's a 3 mile, around the university area transit center down the street. There's a 3 mile radius, and you can get a vehicle door to transit hub for $1 at this point in time. So that $1 is an affordable rate for you to be able to get to the transit center, at which point you have connectivity to, I believe it's 11 routes at this point. What they also have done that Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority didn't do was create door-to-door, a point-to-point option in that same 3 mile radius, where you could go door-to-door and you didn't have to go to a transit stop, but that cost $3. So what they looked to do was expand on the first mile, last mile solution and create a point-to-point door solution that has been very successful, and we'll talk about how those numbers have grown. Another model, Altamont Springs was actually the first one in the country to create any type of partnership with Uber in which they were subsidizing rides the way they were doing it. Essentially, you could ride anywhere in the city in Altamont Springs. There's Lake Mary City, there is Sanborn. There's about 5 cities just north of Orlando out there, north and east of Orlando, that this particular program works in. And you can travel anywhere in those cities, and you just get 20% off of your Uber ride. That's a program that they've started out there as a subsidy. And the cities will pay for that 20% subsidy. Now theirs is funded Theirs is funded by their own local revenue sources. So it was, so they were able to put that up relatively easy. And again, they have leveraged a partnership with Uber, and I believe Lyft is coming into that program soon as well. San Diego has a $5 discount to or from transit hubs in San Diego. I think there's 6 or 7 different transit hubs now that you can take a Uber ride to, and you simply get a $5 discount. Uber knows that you're within some distance of the transit stop, and you will qualify for that discount. LA does the same sort of, is doing the same sort of project that they're setting up through a special federal grant called the Mobility on Demand Sandbox Grant, but they're using a company called VIA. So you can see these programs are beginning to multiply across the country. There are more at this point in time, and you'll continue to see more of these grow. And it's definitely exciting seeing them, seeing these programs grow, because the more we do it, the more we learn, and we all begin to have an opportunity to share data, share experiences, and make it better for everybody. And ultimately, for those who are looking to put out their new programs, they get to skip all the trial period, right? They get to put out a program that they know is a model that is skipping a lot of the problems that the early adopters had to go through. So that's definitely, that is a benefit of being able to do it that way. With these programs, there's been a great deal of national interest in exploring these models, and exactly what I was just saying, in understanding the lessons learned, and understanding the best practices that have come out of it. What are the legal and regulatory issues that they run into? As transit agencies, we accept federal dollars. And when you accept federal dollars, there is an absolute, the biggest list of strict rules and regulations that you can imagine that you have to abide by, and how your money is spent, how it's accounted for, and what it can be used for. And part of the national interest in exploring these models is understanding that these technologies are moving at a rapid rate, but the change in regulatory legislation is not moving at the same speed, and it is inhibiting the ability of transit agencies and other agencies alike to be able to move with the technology. And probably the best example of that is the FTA Mobility on Demand Sandbox Grant. And that is a program where 11 agencies across the country were given grant funding to come up with what might be considered kind of a wild idea. Come up with something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. The federal government would give you, you would list what regulatory exceptions you needed to be able to perform that program, and they would elect to waive those regulations for you, so that you could perform a demonstration pilot, so that they could research it and learn from it. And Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority was one of those, and they're looking to essentially do the program that was adopted originally, but do it for paratransit services, and see how can we do this for people with special handicap needs. And it's been all of these programs are very exciting. They're very cutting edge, and it's really guiding the future of how these projects will be regulated moving forward. The Transportation Research Board has a huge role in this. There's actually been a relatively recent product that is put out that talks about the relationship between the impact of TNCs on transit use, and is there a relationship between ridership growth or loss or decline. And I definitely encourage any of you who are interested in that to seek that out. It's a great easy read. If you read the first 25 or 30 pages of sort of the executive summary, it's a great wealth of information, and it tells you really what's going on in this field at this point in time. There are some advocacy publications that are, some of their publications are in conjunction with TRB. There's Transit Center, Shared Use Mobility Center. They have really good kind of overview publications that you can read about subjects like this. I don't know if you would necessarily want to use it as a empirical scientific research, but it is really good information that you can go to and learn more about it. So with that, that's an overview of where public transit is at today and how we got to this point. And so now I'm going to go through two local examples with Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority's program and HART's, and then after that I'll briefly touch on HART's automated vehicle program. So we'll start with Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority. So in 2014, they went for a one cent penny sales tax in Pinellas County in order to fund better transit and ultimately light rail as well. That lost really badly, like 62 to 38. It was embarrassing, but it was the people speaking, and essentially I think what it came down to is people just did not necessarily want light rail, and they weren't so opposed to better bus service, but that's a whole other story. So with the loss of that referendum, again, PSTA was not to the degree that HART was, but they were faced with making some tough decisions and not having any new revenue, that they had to make some changes in the way that their service was done. And out of that, the staff was tasked with creating performance measures, recommendations, and identifying what routes might need to be cut, what kind of changes needed to be done, and what kind of recommendations, and for staff to come back and give the board some recommendations on that. While we were exploring all of these options, this was our lowest performing route in Pinellas Park. And it was essentially a circulator that ran in a small area that revolves around a Walmart. This is the busiest Walmart in all of Southeast United States in Pinellas Park. And it revolves around a mall and a whole bunch of senior citizen places, where the senior citizens had no other way to get to where they were going. However, it was abysmal ridership. Our recommendation was to cut this route. It was the lowest performing route based on our findings. And when we went to cut it, all of a sudden, like dozens and dozens of people came out of the woodwork and said, you can't cut our route. And our thought was, if you actually wrote it, we wouldn't be cutting it. But that's how it goes. So before we made the cuts, and after the people came out in droves and complained about this, the board said, listen, if you're going to make cuts here or anywhere else in the system, we want you to go out and you research absolutely every option that the people have, and you communicate it to them, whether it be taxi, whether it be some neighborhood shuttle that the county runs, whatever it is, we want to make sure these people understand how they can get around without public transit. When we were doing that, we came across a model at the University of Florida in which the University of Florida Student Union was running a program where they partnered with Lyft. And essentially, the program was this. If on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights between the hours of 9 p.m. and 3 a.m., if you took an Uber ride from some strip of bars that was a couple miles away from where all the student housing was, between those hours, from the bars to campus, you received 50% off of your Uber ride, and the student union paid for it. And obviously it was designed to cut back on drinking and driving. And when we saw this model, we thought to ourselves, what if we did something like that with this? What if we made it affordable for people to be able to get to this Walmart in this little area? And so we essentially started our original model off of this site, off of this University of Florida Gainesville model. And we said that if you are going to the Walmart here, we created a zone that encompassed all of the senior citizen housing, and essentially it is the four outer boundaries of where that shuttle went. If you went to either one of these stop locations, to or from it, PSTA was going to pay. PSTA would pay half of your Uber fare, up to $3. So if it was a $5 ride, we would pay $2.50. You'd pay $2.50. If it was a $7 ride, we'd pay $3, and you'd pay $4. We would never pay more than $3. So this was a concept we went to the board with, and we really they liked it, and it was innovative, and it fit the idea that we needed to start coming up with some innovative solutions and some new ideas. And we really began to garner some local support from local leadership and political support, and it was really important in us moving this forward. So out of that, we had our first phase of this program, which was really a pilot. So again, people originating in a zone. The great thing about Uber, the minute you cross that line, it knows you're outside that line, and automatically your discounted ride is negated. It knows you left it, and even if you left and you came back and you went there, you're not getting your discount. So the technology took care of being able to qualify the rides, and that was a big benefit. This is essentially how we worked with Uber to get it set up. If you look at your Uber today, you'll see Uber X, XL, Uber Select. The minute you go into Pinellas County, you'll see a little PSTA button here. So you slide it over to PSTA, and if you do a ride, if you did a ride in this little boundary, it automatically on the back end qualified all of this discount and accounting for you. You could still slide it over to PSTA, and you could take your regular ride, and it would just qualify it as a regular Uber X ride. And people didn't know any difference. When we first put this out, the very first weekend, we had 7,000 hits. 7,000 people slid it over to the PSTA button, but we only had 3 qualified rides, so people didn't really understand what was going on. So immediately out of this, we understood that there was a serious disconnect in how we needed to market this program. Obviously, people don't just learn these things on their own. So from the first phase, we had some very significant outcomes and lessons learned here. And obviously, some of the big successes were that it garnered a lot of national attention for PSTA. It was very exciting. We created some groundbreaking partnerships, some national recognition. We demonstrated that it could be done. After a while, people started to catch on. We got that number grew every week, and we began to see several hundred people were using this on a regular basis. And we demonstrated that it's an expandable model. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't just expand this zone, and it's going to do the exact same thing. The technology takes care of itself. This was a big one for us. We broke through these regulatory boundaries, and really what we did was we found a way that one of the biggest hurdles to being able to do a program like this is that you can't just put Uber out there all by itself, and you can't just put Lyft out there by themselves, because they don't do alcohol and drug testing, and that's obviously a big thing. And as a public transit agency receiving federal dollars, there has to be drug and alcohol regulations in place. So what we found, we dug deep into the language, and we had our lawyers help us with this, and we found some cases back in the 90s where they did some programs where they gave out, they did some programs in Houston and Seattle where they gave out vouchers that were good on any taxi company in their city. Didn't matter who it was, if you had a voucher and that taxi operated in the city, you could just give it to them, and it was good. People said you can't do that, they're not all drug and alcohol tested. Well, people challenged that rule. The 2 agencies challenged that and said it's just not feasible for us to monitor every single one of these tax companies. So what they came back with, what FTA came back with, was supporting their challenge of this, and said, okay, if you are providing a voucher program, of which this essentially is, it's a new kind of voucher, it is a digital voucher. We're giving you a $5 discount on your ride. Or, excuse me, in this case, at this point in time, we're giving you a half-off voucher on your ride. And if you use 3 or more partners in your program, then you are exempt from the drug and alcohol policies. So what we came up with was we partnered with Uber, we partnered with a local taxi company that did do drug and alcohol testing, and we also partnered with a wheelchair company. And the wheelchair company provided the ADA accessibility, met the ADA regulations that were required, And through that, we were able to get around these regulatory boundaries. We had 3 providers, we had a wheelchair provider, and we were able to legally operate this. And that was a big breakthrough, which was really, this was probably the first or second most biggest reason why other agencies weren't willing to do a program like this. And many of them still aren't, and they're not necessarily convinced that this is it, but it's been supported by FDA. They're very aware of these programs at this point in time. So moving on from that, the challenges in this, data for us is key, right? We all want data. That's how we model and analyze and decide how we're going to move forward. Data with Uber is incredibly challenging. You're not getting any data from Uber. Their data is everything. If they give you all the their concern is that if they give you all the information on where people are going and going to and from, us as a public transit agency, if Lyft came along and says, I'm making a public records request for your data as a public agency, we're not allowed to say no. So their data can go into the hands of a competitor. So we had to give up the right to get any significant amount of data. But at this point in time, we were just excited that we were doing something that nobody had done. Another challenge was the technology. We didn't own it. We were at the mercy of Uber, at this point in time in this program, we knew 99% of all the rides were being done on Uber. The taxi option was not very popular. We were getting 4 or 5 rides a month on the taxi. Everybody was using Uber. So if there was an Uber update, or there may have been something coming down the road that may impact the way in which this operates, we were sort of at the mercy of how that's going to impact our program, and there's not a whole lot we were able to do about it. So not only is that a challenge, it's a big risk for us. But again, we were committed to doing this, and we charged on. And again, another challenge was the demographics. There's Title VI issues here. If any of you are familiar with Title VI, it's equity. We have to provide equitable opportunities to people. One of the reasons we chose the taxi company is that if you don't have a smartphone, you can call in to the taxi company, and they could provide you with one of these rides. You can pay cash through the taxi company. And what we really found from our own research, was that people, regardless of how of their income level, they had access to the technology. And the technology, but they weren't necessarily using Uber because they don't use it on a regular basis. So we were seeing the disparity really began to happen where people were using the technology. And that was a challenge, and that came in the marketing efforts that we took on after that. I'm going to skip over this. I briefly talked about it. Our next phase, essentially what we moved into, is we expanded it countywide. Okay, and we adjusted our fare model. And our fares are now starting at Pinellas, at PSTA, now started about $1 a trip. So instead of subsidizing half the trip up to $3, it was just a flat fee that you could get to any one of these stars, and PSTA will pay the first $5 of the ride. And essentially, if you divide all these up into equal areas, if you live in any one of these areas, for about $1, you can get to any one of these stars anywhere in the county. It will connect you to a frequent route in the system, and it's been very effective. We've seen significant growth in the project, and it continues to grow. Even though I'm not there, I've tried my best to keep up with it, and it continues to grow. We're getting a little low on time, so I'm going to skip forward here to HyperLink. So HyperLink, we sort of really don't need to go too much into the problem we're trying to solve. It's the exact same problem, but how we go about doing it is different. We have an expansive area here. How are we getting people to and from the public transit stops? Hillsborough County is very unwalkable. It's not very bike friendly. So your only option, your best option is moving around in a vehicle, and oftentimes it can be very difficult to get to a bus stop. So our solution was starting a pilot with 3 3-mile zones. These two are overlapping, and this sort of politically ended up in here. This isn't necessarily a 3-mile zone, but this kind of serves the North University area. So essentially how this pilot worked was that these transit stops, Brandon Hospital, Brandon Mall, this was Carrollwood over here, and UATC you could get to for $3, I believe, when it originally started. But that's all you could do. You could only go to a transit hub, not any transit stop. So, you had to stay within these zones. You couldn't go, again, you couldn't go outside of the zones. And really one of the big difference between this was that HART owns they developed the app themselves, which we see has some really big benefits over PSTA's model. So it was created to not only, the Uber, you're only doing one ride, one person per ride. We don't have Uber Pool or Lyft Line in our counties yet. So this gives you the ability to do a shared ride. It uses this dynamic ride matching algorithm, which if you start a ride and you have your end place, it will begin to match you up with people along your way to move the most amount of people efficiently. It had in the contract, we were able to contract in guaranteed levels of service in order to have a certain amount of vehicles. We quickly began to realize that still was not enough vehicles. And again, it's based on next available, just like Uber was. What we had not been able to implement yet was subscription based. So if every single Tuesday at 10 o'clock you're going to CVS to pick up your prescription, you'll be able to do this in the very near future. And again, we have control over this. We can develop this, and we are looking to do this. And transit supported feature sets, this is really where everything is going. One of the biggest things that transit agencies and researchers are trying to look at doing across the country at this point is how do we create one app for everything? One app, one payment method that is seamless. Right now, a lot of these apps you can go into and you can plan your trip, but if you want to book an Uber ride, you have to leave that app and go to the Uber and book your ride, and then you have to go back into it. You have to leave it to go to something else. What is trying to be developed is a seamless app experience. So this is very much like Uber HeartLink. You turn it on, you're able to, it'll tell you how long it's supposed to be, it'll tell you how much it's going to be, tells you where your trip is. Right now, you're only one passenger, that can change, there's up to 4 vehicles. You can see your car coming along the way. What's very cool about our program, when we originally started it, Cesar Hernandez, who at one point was the student president here at USF, he brokered a deal with Tesla, where we have 4 AV Tesla vehicles that are paid for by TICO, a great public-private partnership for this program. So if you're lucky enough, you can get picked up in a really nice Tesla. Here's one of the Teslas here. And essentially it'll get you to a transit bus here. This transit supported feature, again, this is not yet completed, but we're working on it. And again, it's for you to be able to book your return trips ahead of time, really optimize your bus connection. Transit app, has anybody ever heard of Transit app? That's a great option. Transit app and Uber have now partnered. If you take an Uber ride and you're looking at your Transit app, you can book your Uber ride inside Transit app. When you get out of your Uber, it tells you where the nearest bus stop is. That's the kind of functionality where a lot of this is moving to. I'm going to briefly touch on this here. So the difficulty with both these programs are they were very new. We didn't have a whole lot of market research, so we didn't necessarily know how our rider profiles were going to play out. In doing a lot of the surveys, again, this is very similar to PSTA's. Most everyone has a regular cell phone or a smartphone. transportation options other than the bus. Most everybody around here rides with somebody else. That's because it's very unsafe and difficult to bike and walk. Access mode to your first bus stop. In both of these, to get to your bus stop and to leave your bus stop, it's walking. That's why this has become so popular, is because Florida in the summertime is not comfortable to walk. And if you only have to pay $1 to get to where you need to go and it's within a couple miles, this becomes a really good option. Our new market modifications that we redeployed with our Mission Max that we just did in October, where we did a great deal of streamlining. We eliminated the 20% of routes. We got out of Carrollwood. We combined two different zones here in Temple Terrace and University, as well as the Brandon ones we modified a little bit. We went from doing about 1,100 trips a month to well over 4,000. I think last month we did 4,800. In 2 months, we quadrupled our ridership on this. And this is all about expanding our marketing efforts. It's all about learning from where we were. We took a zone. A lot of the new rides are coming from the expanded zones that we put out here, having gotten out of Carrollwood, and moving it over here and being able to expand here. And a lot of students use this from the surveys that we see. Another thing we did, the same way that PSTA did, was we modified the pricing structure. Now it's only $1 to get to a transit hub. Pay $1 to get there. That's very affordable. But and you still have the $3 option now, which you didn't have before, to be able to go anywhere in this circle. If you get picked up here, you can go. There's a little dotted line right here. As long as you're in this circle, if you get picked up here, you can go anywhere in the circle for $3. You don't have to go to the transit stop, and that's done a great deal in expanding the ridership. So it's 11:55. I was going to talk a little bit about our AV. We have a AV project that's downtown. It'll be one of the very first in the nation to run in fixed traffic. It's going to be on the Marion Transit way. It was supposed to be up and running by now. We've run into a few hiccups. It's very exciting. It's going to be kind of a low speed, takes 6 to 15 passengers, and it'll just run north and south on the Marion Transit Center. What's exciting is that it plays into this as transportation engineers. You all are probably heard of the connected vehicle stuff at this point, and it's definitely an up and coming field. We are doing a pilot. Tampa was one of the few places where we're getting some funds to do a pilot where I want to say 1,600 vehicles. Does that?
I think it's more like 2,800.
2,800. Okay, so 2,800 vehicles are equipped with connected vehicle technology. Some pedestrians will have it on their apps. The automated vehicle that runs up and down Marion Transitway will have it. Where is that? Somewhere right in here. Right here. And our buses and the streetcar will all be equipped with them as well. And essentially what it does is allows them all to talk to each other. And the idea here is to research decreases in accidents and create some lessons learned and some best practices of being able to not only implement this, but really what's the data on showing that it's safer for transit. One of the biggest things we're interested in seeing is the impact on the pedestrian and transit interface. It's always a big thing for us. So these are our partners. CUTR's a partner in this project as well. We're very happy to have USF and CUTR as a part of that. City of Tampa and DOT. So with that, I went a little longer than I thought I was going to. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer? Yes.
Uber and Lyft rides are becoming cheaper every year. So let's say 5 years, 6 years down the line, they're very cheap. And then how does transit agencies survive? How does still people take buses because it's so cheap that you don't need buses?
Well, that's definitely a big challenge that transit agencies are trying to answer at this point in time. And I think a lot of it goes back to this looking at how applications can be integrated together. And let's say you're able to buy a subscription type service to where you can get your transit and your Uber in one subscription price. you're able to book those trips seamlessly. Those are the kinds of ideas and models that some agencies are looking at. But it's a big question. Right now there is no answer for it, but it's definitely causing some significant concern.
I probably have missed, so when you talk about $1 and $3
Yes.
Uber trips, does the HART needs to subsidize that or not?
Yes, so for the HART model, we contract with Transdev. Transdev is a company that provides a guaranteed number of vehicles that are out on the road at any given time. We pay them 16. Their contract is each ride is $16. Okay, so if you pay one, HART pays the other 15. If you pay $3, HART pays 13. So, and you know what? I take that back. I believe it's $10, not 16. $10 is another.
And for PSTA is?
PSTA pays the first $5 of the ride. So the minimum ride on an Uber right now is like $6.70, no matter what. If you go 3 feet, or that'll get you about 3 miles. So anywhere from the minute you step in the car to 3 miles, that costs you $6.70. So PSTA will pay the first $5. So the least amount that you as a customer are going to pay is $1.70. It used to be $1, but again, as you're sort of at the mercy of Uber, their prices keep going up, and PSTA subsidies staying the same. So people begin to pay a little bit more. You don't really have control over changing that. So, yes.
Thank you very much for coming back. We hope it's the first of many times.
Yes, thank you for asking.
I was wondering about, you said that the data are hard to obtain from the Uber and Lyft
Yeah.
TNCs, but do they offer you a way to directly interact with the customers, to periodically survey them? What do you think of the service? How should the service change, or how to get feedback? I was wondering about that.
So when I left, they were working on, and I don't know where they are with this, but they were working with them to make it so that after you successfully completed a direct connect ride, you would then get a pop-up link to take like a Survey Monkey survey.
So that could be really valuable.
Yes,
to understand
yes, very much so.
how I-
And they understand that transit agencies need that data and want it, but it was funny work. They're great to work with until you get to the lawyers, and everything just goes away, and you're like, ah. So, but it's an adventure working with them. So, yes.
So HyperLink use individual vehicles, or do they use like shuttles, like vans, or?
They use individual vehicles for like a sedan vehicle, and you can fit 4 passengers in there. They have 4 seat belts, so 3 in the back, 1 in the front.
Those are contractors, or are they?
Yes, they are, and
employees?
they're contracted by Transdev. I believe they subcontract to perhaps Yellow Cab. I believe
For the hyperlink, do you know if they are classified as just demand response directly operated for NTD?
Yes, so it's a great question. I didn't know if anyone here would know what that was about. That's one of the advantages of the hyperlink. We're able to submit those as on demand because we do share rides. If you're not, to meet the definition of public transit, it has to be able to be a shared ride. Doesn't mean it is a shared ride. It just has to have that capability. So hyperlink, you can count the rides. The PSTA, that's one of the big, again, that's just another problem that some agencies have. Unless you have Uber Pool in your market, it's a single ride, it doesn't meet the definition of public transit, and you can't count the rides. So, yes, Dr.
Yes, Chris. So, so basically, I understand is that you, through the hyperlink, you provide subsidy or discount, so for customers, so they can get that to the transit staff or senders, and so basically, you try to increase the ridership on the HART, but at the same time you spend the money to increase that ride.
Right.
And so overall, does HART start to make more money?
Well,
Or
that's the big question that is not necessarily answered now. So for those that aren't necessarily familiar, so every time we get a ride, we report it to the National Transit Database, and it goes into what's called formula funds. So if you're spending a certain amount of money to get more passengers, at some point the balance tips, and you put enough new people on that you're making more money than you're spending to get them there, and that's we are not quite there yet. Yes.
Chris, thank you for the nice presentation. And you said that currently it seems like this kind of collaboration with private partners are at mercy of the private partners because they are controlling the apps and everything. Is it possible if, let's say, if HART develops an app and that receives like from door-to-door transportation demands from a traveler or from door-to-door, and this app then decides to call, let's say, maybe it's connected to Uber app, Lyft app, and sends a request, and then filter out the options, and then doing some internalization, and this way, and it's going to be the HART's control deciding what I'm going to use, and just to call these apps as if you're just a user of calling these apps. Maybe you can do some contracts, and that way maybe it's like as a transit authority, you may have the
You
control
become
of
a
the
broker initially.
Yeah.
Of those rides. Yeah. So the brokering model is definitely something that transit agencies are moving towards, where you are essentially, you can contract with multiple providers, if Uber and Lyft are some of them, and you take in people's requests for rides, and you put them in and you deploy them. You deploy an Uber to them where they don't even have to touch, they don't need a cell phone to do it. You're doing it for them through Uber Central or Lyft Concierge, one of those type platforms. We tried to do that at PSTA when I was there, but we had to sign a non-disclosure agreement that said we couldn't keep that that origin destination data. We could see it when we were doing it, but we couldn't use it to create any reports and publish it out. So again, that's part of it is their control. But the network, I think the network brokering model is definitely something where stuff is going to in the future.
Yeah, that's also something I was curious because now we at least have Uber and Lyft who are competing with each other. And I think collaborating with the transit agency could be one market that both of them want to pursue. So would that kind of raise the negotiation power of transit agency when you can talk to both of them instead of say, I'll just work with Uber?
Yeah, and again, with their own internal competition, we tried to get both on board originally, and Uber demanded exclusive rights to that program. So I think that's a little bit different now. I think you would probably have some more success in being able to have Uber and Lyft on as options for people. But yeah, I mean, you make good points, but all of that goes into, that's why we need more agencies to continue doing these, and somebody needs to try that model, and just keep it moving. So, I think there's a question in the back.
Yeah, I just downloaded a HyperLink, so I'm wondering, I sent a request from school to my home, and it costs $3, but shows that it only has the shuttle bus, right? It's not a private car.
It
The
only.
shuttle bus, I mean, all the shuttle buses owned by one company, now it's a private car, like in Berlin.
Let me take a look at it before we leave. It should be.
It shows that only the shuttle bus.
HyperLink is not HyperLink uses a contract with other side.
So it's run by only one company.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
It's what, I misunderstood your question, yes. Yeah.
That maybe slow.
And If y'all try it, it's oftentimes it's difficult to find one or to even get a ride, but we are redoing our contract to expand the guaranteed level of service. So that's a problem we've run into.
Why did HART eliminate all stops on campus here?
That was a decision that was made as part of our streamlining of routes. And, you know, the cost of operating goes back to time and distance we spend on the road. And we felt that we provided good connectivity to Bull Runner, and it was Bull Runner's responsibility to serve the campus ultimately.
Okay.
That was part of what we
Well, I guess it's a very nice presentation. Thank Chris for.
Thank you all very much.